She stood at the front of the room, small and still, hands clasped behind her back. The overhead projector hummed. The equation was still glowing on the screen behind her. And the room, packed with mathematicians, professors, and competition judges from 6 different countries, was absolutely, completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. One judge slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, as if he needed to reset his vision to confirm what he had just witnessed. Another leaned forward so quickly her chair scraped the floor, the sound cutting through the hush like a gunshot. The little girl in the purple dress didn't flinch. She simply looked up at the panel of stunned adults with those calm, warm eyes and said, in a voice softer than you'd expect from someone who had just done the impossible, "Is the answer correct?" It had taken her 10 seconds. 10 seconds to solve a problem that the judges had placed on that screen as an example of what even gifted high school competitors typically could not complete. 10 seconds. And she was 8 years old. But before we get to that moment, the moment that left an entire room of the world's most respected mathematical minds speechless, we need to go back. Back to where this story really begins. Back to a small apartment in Atlanta, Georgia, where a little girl named Amara Osei sat at a kitchen table every single evening, working through numbers by the light of a clip-on lamp, while her mother worked the overnight shift at the hospital. This is Amara's story, and I promise you, by the time it's over, you will never again underestimate a child based on what they look like or where they come from. Amara Josephine Osei was born on a Thursday morning in September, the second daughter of Kofi and Abina Osei, Ghanaian immigrants who had come to the United States 14 years before Amara arrived. Carrying 3 suitcases, $2,000, and an unshakable belief that education was the door to every room worth entering. Kofi Os drove a delivery van for a warehouse on the south side of Atlanta. He worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when the overtime was available, always coming home smelling of cardboard and diesel fuel, always with the same steady smile for his daughters. He had studied engineering briefly back in Ghana before life interrupted those plans, but the love of numbers never left him. On Sunday afternoons, when the warehouse was quiet and his feet needed a rest, Kofi would sit at the kitchen table with Amara and her older sister Edwoa, and they would play what he called number games, not worksheets. Not drills, games. "How many ways," Kofi would ask, holding up 8 fingers, "can you make this number?" And Amara, even at 3 years old, would answer, 2 4s, 1 7, and 1 1, 8 1s, 4 2s. She never tired of it. Where other toddlers wanted cartoons, Amara wanted puzzles. Her mother Abina worked as a certified nursing assistant at Grady Memorial Hospital, night shifts primarily, because the differential pay helped. And because it meant she could be home in the mornings to walk Amara to school. Abina was the kind of woman who carried the weight of a hard life with such grace that most people never saw the weight at all. She laughed easily, prayed consistently, and kept a small whiteboard on the refrigerator where she wrote encouraging messages for her daughters every single morning. Things like, "Your mind is a gift. Use it boldly, and someone before you made this possible, make it possible for someone after you." Amara absorbed all of it. The number games, the messages on the whiteboard, the stories her parents told about her grandparents back in Kumasi, about sacrifice and persistence. She was a quiet child, not shy exactly, but thoughtful, the kind of 8-year-old who listened more than she spoke. Who would pause before answering a question and actually think about it rather than just producing the first thing that came to mind. At school, she was good, reliably, consistently good. Her teachers liked her. She turned in her homework, participated when called on, sat neatly in her seat. But good is not the same as noticed. And in a crowded second-grade classroom at Riverside Elementary School, in a district that was perpetually underfunded and perpetually overwhelmed. Good meant you didn't cause problems. It didn't necessarily mean anyone was paying close attention to what was happening inside that quiet little mind. But Amara's second-grade teacher, Ms. Patricia Cole, paid attention. She had been teaching for 22 years. And she knew, the way experienced teachers sometimes just know, that there was something different about the small girl in the 3rd row who finished math worksheets so fast she had to begin extra pages, who sometimes, when the class was doing single-digit addition, would sit with her pencil tapping rhythmically against the desk, not out of boredom exactly, but out of a kind of contained energy, like a river that needed more space to flow. One afternoon in October, Ms. Cole kept Amara after class, not because she was in trouble, because she wanted to show her something. "I want to try something with you, Ms. Cole said, pulling a chair beside Amara's desk and opening a workbook that was clearly not second-grade material. "Tell me what you see." Amara looked at the page. It was a multiplication problem. Long multiplication, the kind most kids didn't encounter until 4th grade. She studied it for a moment, then picked up her pencil, and in 45 seconds wrote the answer in neat, careful digits at the bottom of the page. It was correct. Ms. Cole sat very still for a moment. Then she turned to the next page and the one after that. Each time Amara solved the problem, each time faster than the last. "Amara, Ms. Cole said carefully, "Where did you learn to do this?" The little girl shrugged one shoulder. "My dad and I play number games," she said simply. "And sometimes I look at numbers when I can't sleep." That evening, Ms. Cole called Is Amara Osei at home. Riverside Elementary sat in the kind of neighborhood that travel guides never mention. The streets were a patchwork of chain-link fences and community gardens, corner stores with hand-painted signs and churches whose congregations had been anchoring the community for generations. It was not wealthy. It was not, by most institutional measures, resourced. But it was alive in ways that statistics can't capture: block parties in August, elders who knew every child by name, families who had been neighbors for 30 years. The school itself was a 3-story brick building that had seen better decades. The cafeteria served hot lunches that kids actually liked. The library was small but well-loved, its shelves replenished every year by a parent volunteer organization that held bake sales and a winter carnival. The hallways were covered in student artwork, and the principal, Dr. Sandra Morris, a Georgia native who had grown up 3 miles away and chosen to come back, ran the place with a combination of high expectations and genuine warmth that had made Riverside more than the sum of its aging infrastructure. This was the world Amara moved through every day. She knew the custodian's name, Mr. Willie, and said good morning to him without being prompted. She knew which lunch lady gave slightly larger portions if you made eye contact and smiled. She knew the crack in the sidewalk near the front entrance that you had to jump over on rainy days because it collected a perfect puddle. She also knew, without fully being able to articulate it yet, that certain things were harder for kids like her, that the enrichment programs were mostly at other schools, that the gifted and talented identification process had somehow never identified anyone from her block. She didn't dwell on this. She was 8. But she noticed the way children notice things, quietly, without judgment, filing it away somewhere in the back of that remarkable mind. It was Ms. Cole's phone call that changed the trajectory. Abina listened carefully, asked careful questions, and that Friday evening sat down with Kofi at the kitchen table after the girls were in bed and told him what the teacher had said. That their daughter wasn't just bright, that she might be, Ms. Cole had used the word carefully, not wanting to raise expectations recklessly, exceptional. Kofi was quiet for a long time. Then he reached across the table and took Abina's hand. "We've always known," he said softly. "We just needed someone else to see it too." The next morning, a Saturday, Kofi drove Amara to the public library and checked out every book he could find on mathematics for advanced young learners. 3 of them, that was all they had, but it was a beginning. The Georgia State Junior Mathematics Enrichment Program was not widely known outside certain circles. It ran out of a university campus in Midtown Atlanta, funded by a combination of state grants and private donations, and it served a very specific population. Children identified by their schools as mathematically gifted, typically in grades 3 through 8, though exceptions were made. The program offered weekend workshops, competition preparation, and most crucially, access to instructors and resources that schools like Riverside simply couldn't provide. Cole submitted Amara's name for consideration in November, along with a detailed written assessment and samples of Amara's work. The program director, a man named Richard Harwell, reviewed the application. Richard Harwell had been running the program for 11 years. He was, by most accounts, effective at his job. He had a genuine interest in developing mathematical talent. He also had, whether he was fully conscious of it or not, a very fixed mental image of what mathematical talent looked like. The children he typically championed tended to come from a specific kind of household, a certain zip code, a certain type of parental occupation, a certain demographic profile. It wasn't a formal policy, it was just a pattern, the kind of pattern that becomes invisible when no one names it. Harwell reviewed Amara's file. He saw the work samples, which were objectively impressive. He saw Ms. Cole's written assessment, which was glowing. And then he looked at the address, the school name. The parent occupations, delivery driver and nursing assistant. He called Ms. Cole to deliver his decision personally, which in retrospect seemed like courtesy but functioned as something else. "I've reviewed the application," he told her in a measured, not unkind voice. "And while the work samples are promising, I have to consider fit. Our program moves very fast. The children in it have typically had more structured mathematical preparation. We wouldn't want to put a child in a situation where she's overwhelmed. It wouldn't be fair to her." Ms. Cole was quiet for 1 beat, 2 beats. "Mr. Harwell," she said, "Amara has independently been working at a 5th grade mathematics level for at least a year, without any structured preparation. I believe fit is exactly what she has." "I appreciate your enthusiasm for your student," Harwell said. "But I think, given her background, perhaps we start her with our introductory track and see how she does." The introductory track was for younger beginners. Children who had never been in any enrichment program before. Children who were learning what multiplication meant. Ms. Cole told Abina what had been said, choosing her words carefully but not obscuring the truth. Abina listened without interrupting. When Ms. Cole finished, there was a silence. Then Abina said, in a voice entirely devoid of drama, "We'll take the introductory track." Because Abina Osei had not come 4,000 miles to let her daughter be stopped by the first closed door. And because she knew, with the absolute certainty of a mother who had watched her child light up in the presence of numbers since before she could speak full sentences, that Amara would not stay in the introductory track for long. She was right, but the road between that decision and the moment of vindication would be longer and harder and more painful than any of them anticipated. The first Saturday workshop of the enrichment program was held in early January. Amara wore her good dress, the navy blue one with the white collar that her grandmother had sent from Accra, and carried a new notebook her father had bought her the night before. The kind with the marble pattern on the cover. Abina drove her to the campus, walked her to the door of the lecture hall, and crouched down to straighten Amara's collar. "Be yourself," Abina told her. "That is always enough." The introductory track class had 12 children in it, ranging in age from 7 to 9. Amara was assigned to it, placed there by Harwell's decision, alongside children who were just beginning to explore addition and subtraction beyond basic tables. The instructor was a young graduate student named Marcus, who was kind and enthusiastic, and completely unprepared for what sat down in the front row. Within 20 minutes of the first session, Marcus had quietly stopped the lesson twice to recalibrate, because Amara kept answering questions before he finished asking them. Not rudely, she would raise her hand and wait to be called on, every time, but the answers she gave were not just correct, they were often extended. She would solve the problem, and then, when he nodded at her to continue, explain the underlying principle behind why the method worked, in language that was clear and precise and entirely her own. After class, Marcus went to find Richard Harwell. "The little girl, Amara Osei, she needs to be moved up," Marcus said. "She's not a beginner." "She's not even close to a beginner." Harwell looked at him for a moment. "Let's give it a few weeks," he said. "Let her settle in." The weeks passed. Amara continued to sit in the introductory track class. She continued, with impeccable politeness, to complete every problem placed in front of her in a fraction of the expected time. She helped other students when they were stuck, without being asked, turning in her seat with a patient smile to walk a classmate through a step they had missed. The other kids loved her. Marcus grew increasingly frustrated with the situation. 3 weeks in, he submitted a formal written request to have Amara reassigned to the advanced track. Harwell's response came by email. 2 sentences. "Thank you for your concern. The current placement is appropriate for now." That was the moment Ms. Cole, who Abina had kept closely informed, began keeping records. Meanwhile, Amara simply continued, because she didn't know about the emails or the formal request or Harwell's refusal. She knew only that she was in a classroom every Saturday morning, and that she loved it, and that the numbers in her notebook were getting more interesting the further she went on her own. Because here is what no one in the enrichment program fully understood yet. Amara wasn't just working at a 5th grade level. She hadn't been since October. By January, the workbooks her father brought home from the library, and the YouTube lectures she had found on her mother's phone. Watching advanced mathematics tutorials at an age when most children are watching animated shows had taken her considerably further than anyone realized. In her marble notebook, between the worksheets Marcus handed out, Amara was working problems she had found on a website listing past competition mathematics questions. Not elementary school competition mathematics, not even middle school. She had found her way, through a series of clicks and curiosities, to problems from the Mathematical Olympiad, the real one. And she was working them out, line by patient line, in her neat, small handwriting, by the light of the clip-on lamp in the kitchen while her mother slept before a night shift. If only Richard Harwell had looked more closely at what was actually in that notebook, everything that followed might have unfolded very differently. In February, the program held its first internal assessment, a timed worksheet designed to measure progress since January. It was administered to all tracks simultaneously, though each track received different problems. The advanced track received problems at roughly a 6th grade competition level. The introductory track received problems at a 2nd to 3rd grade level. Harwell was in the room during the assessment, as he often was on evaluation days, moving between the groups with a clipboard and the particular energy of someone who enjoyed being in charge. He paused at Amara's desk. She had finished the introductory track worksheet, every problem, in 4 minutes and 17 seconds. She had checked each one twice, and then, because there was time remaining, had flipped the paper over and begun writing on the back, working through a problem she had clearly brought in her own head, filling the blank white space with her own mathematics. Harwell looked at the back of the paper. He didn't recognize what she was working on. He frowned. "Amara," he said, in the kind of voice that is ostensibly gentle but carries an undertone of correction, "you're supposed to be reviewing your answers, not drawing." Amara looked up. "I wasn't drawing," she said quietly. "I finished the sheet. I was working on a different problem." "The assessment is the task," Harwell said firmly. "Let's stay on task." He took the paper, flipped it back to the front side, and placed it on her desk face-up. Then he moved on. Marcus, who had witnessed this from 3 feet away, felt something clench in his chest. He said nothing. He would later describe this moment as one of his deepest professional regrets. Several of the other children had seen it too. A boy named David, 9 years old, who was also in the introductory track despite being more than ready for advancement, caught Amara's eye from across the table. He gave her a small nod. She gave one back, the silent solidarity of children who understand, without needing to discuss it, that something unfair has just occurred. The assessment results were returned the following week. Amara received a perfect score on the introductory track worksheet, which by this point surprised no one except Harwell, who annotated the result in his records with the note. "Shows strong fundamental understanding." Introductory placement confirmed appropriate. Appropriate. The word landed in Marcus's stomach like a stone when he saw it. He called Ms. Cole directly that evening. Ms. Cole, who had been patient for 2 months, called Abina. And Abina, who had also been patient for 2 months, sat quietly at the kitchen table for a long time after that call, looking at the window over the sink, listening to the distant sound of the city. She did not tell Amara what was happening. She never intended to. Whatever frustration and grief she felt about watching a system fail her daughter, again, she kept from Amara's view. Because she refused to let institutional smallness become a story, Amara told herself about her own worth. But that night, after checking on her sleeping girls, Abina sat back down at the kitchen table and opened a browser on her phone. She searched for every mathematics competition in the state of Georgia that was open to children Amara's age. She made a list. She researched each one. And near the bottom of the page, she found something that made her stop and read it twice, slowly. the Georgia Invitational Young Mathematicians Showcase, a regional competition held annually in March, affiliated with a national organization, open to children ages 7 through 14. The top finishers from the regional competition would be invited to a national showcase, where, in the presence of professional mathematicians and academic judges, they would be assessed not just on computation speed, but on deep mathematical reasoning. Registration closed in 3 weeks. Abina read the eligibility requirements carefully. There was no restriction on current academic track, no requirement for a specific school designation. Any child meeting the age criteria could register. The entry fee was $40. $40 was not nothing. It was a tank of gas. It was almost a full day of work at the hospital. Abina sat with that number for a moment, then opened the registration form. She registered Amara that night without mentioning it to Kofi until the following morning. When she told him over coffee, he was silent for a moment, and then he said, "Good. Now we prepare." What Harwell didn't know, what he couldn't have known, because he had stopped paying genuine attention to Amara months ago, was that the preparation for this competition had been quietly happening for a very long time already. March arrived. The program's enrichment workshops were still running every Saturday. Amara was still in the introductory track. She had stopped being bothered by it, or at least had learned to store the frustration somewhere it couldn't touch her love of mathematics. She came. She completed the worksheets. She helped her classmates. And she continued in the evenings in the kitchen with the clip-on lamp and the marble notebook to work on problems that existed in a completely different universe from what the introductory track was offering. The marble notebook was now its 3rd volume. Kofi had started buying them in packs. 2 weeks before the competition, Kofi brought home a surprise. A friend from the warehouse, a man named Jerome, whose son had attended a mathematics camp years earlier, had heard about Amara's registration and mentioned it to his former neighbor, a retired professor of applied mathematics named Dr. Yvonne Chambers, who had spent her career at Spelman College and had the quiet, steel-spined dignity of a woman who had been underestimated her entire life and had outlasted every person who doubted her. Dr. Chambers agreed to meet Amara. The meeting happened on a Wednesday afternoon in Dr. Chambers' living room, which smelled of Earl Grey tea and old books and was lined, floor to ceiling on 2 full walls, with mathematics texts in varying states of annotation. Amara looked at those shelves the way some children look at Christmas morning. Dr. Chambers sat across the coffee table from Amara and placed a single sheet of paper between them. "Show me what you know," she said simply. 45 minutes later, Dr. Chambers sat back in her armchair and looked at Abina, who was sitting quietly to the side. "Mrs. Osei," she said, and her voice carried the particular weight of someone choosing words with great care. "I have been teaching mathematics for 37 years. I want you to understand what I'm about to say because I would not say it if I didn't mean it precisely." She paused. "Your daughter is extraordinary, not promising, not advanced for her age. Extraordinary. I have not seen mathematical intuition of this quality in a child this young in my entire career." The room was quiet for a moment. Amara was still looking at the math problem on the table, one finger tracing an element of the proof she had written, as if she was already somewhere past the compliment, already thinking about the next problem. Abina looked at her daughter for a long moment, then she looked at Dr. Chambers. "What does she need?" she asked. "She needs the right room," Dr. Chambers said. "And I believe she's about to find it." The 2 weeks leading up to the competition were the happiest 2 weeks Amara could remember. Every evening, Dr. Chambers would send Abina a problem via text message, competition-level problems, genuine mathematical Olympiad problems from past years, and Amara would work them in her notebook by the clip-on lamp and text the solutions back through her mother's phone. Most evenings the response came quickly, a single checkmark emoji, which Amara had come to love like a small medal. One evening she sent back a solution to a number theory problem that Dr. Chambers had included specifically because she wanted to see whether Amara would attempt it or skip it. Amara not only solved it, but provided 2 different solution pathways, noting which was more elegant and why. Dr. Chambers's response that evening was not the usual checkmark. It was 5 words: "You are ready, Go shine. What nobody knew, not Harwell, not the other program participants, not the parents or instructors at the competition, was that one of the problems Dr. Chambers had sent Amara during those 2 weeks was a problem from the most recent International Mathematical Olympiad. One of the 6 problems that represent the highest level of pre-collegiate mathematics in the world. A problem that typically takes expert competitors up to 4.5 hours to complete. Amara had solved it in just under 2 hours at a kitchen table in Atlanta while her mother heated soup on the stove. But nobody knew that yet. The day before the competition, Harwell sent a program-wide email to families. It was administrative in nature: arrival times, parking information, a reminder about the scoring structure. In a section titled Participant Notes, he had listed each child's assigned track alongside their name for the purposes of check-in organization. Next to Amara's name in plain text for all parents and staff to see, introductory track. Abina read it, set down her phone, and went to the window again. Then she called Ms. Cole. He listed her as introductory in the competition email, she said, her voice carefully level. I saw it, Ms. Cole said. Abina, tomorrow, none of that matters. I know, Abina said. I know, she did know. She just needed to hear it out loud. The Georgia Invitational Young Mathematicians Showcase was held on a Saturday morning in mid-March in a large conference room at Georgia State University's downtown campus. 47 children had registered from across the state, ranging in age from 7 to 14, representing 11 different schools and enrichment programs. The format involved 3 rounds. The first 2 were individual written assessments, problems increasing in difficulty, timed, administered to all participants simultaneously regardless of age or track designation. The third round was the demonstration round. The top 5 scorers from rounds 1 and 2 would be invited to attempt a single problem in front of the panel of judges working at the board. Harwell arrived at the venue with 6 of his program participants, including Amara. He moved through the check-in process with the comfortable authority of someone who had attended this event for years and knew how it worked. He spoke briefly with other program directors, nodding and smiling. He did not speak to Amara's parents, though Kofi and Abina were standing 5 feet away. The children were seated alphabetically for round 1. Amara sat at a table near the window, her marble notebook in her bag beside her chair. She wasn't allowed to use it during the competition, but she had brought it anyway. The way some people carry a lucky stone. Her pencils were lined up at the top of the desk in size order. She looked, to anyone observing her, perfectly calm. Round 1 began at 9 o'clock. The problems in round 1 were complex. For most of the children in the room, they represented a genuine challenge. The kind of problems that required not just knowing formulas, but understanding why formulas existed. And when to apply which approach. The room settled into the focused, pressured quiet of a timed examination. Amara worked steadily, not frantically, steadily. She moved through the problems in sequence, pausing sometimes not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to be sure she was showing the full reasoning chain, not just the result. She turned her paper over at 14 minutes and 30 seconds. The allotted time was 30 minutes. The proctor, a young woman named Keisha who was assisting with the event for the first time, noticed. She glanced at Amara, then at the clock, then back at Amara. She made a small note in the margin of her clipboard. Round 2 followed after a short break. The problems were harder. Several children in the room visibly struggled, pencils hovering, erasers deployed, the occasional quiet, frustrated exhale. Amara worked through these as well, again with that same steady, unhurried focus. She finished with 8 minutes to spare. The scoring took 20 minutes. During that time, the children were released to the hallway where their parents were waiting. Amara found her mother and her father and walked straight into Kofi's arms without speaking. He held her and she stood still within the hug for a long moment, absorbing it. How was it? Abina asked. Good, Amara said. Then after a small pause, I liked the last problem in round 2. Kofi laughed, a warm, full laugh that turned a few heads in the hallway. Of course you did, he said. Harwell was standing across the hall with another program director when the scoring was completed, and the top 5 names were announced over the room's PA system. He heard 4 names he recognized, children from the advanced track programs across several schools, And then he heard a fifth name, Amara Osei. He turned. His expression shifted, not dramatically, not yet, but there was something that passed across his face. A small recalibration. He found her in the crowd, the small girl in the purple dress who had appeared on his roster as introductory track for 3 months. She was walking toward the main room with her parents behind her head up, her marble notebook tucked under her arm as if it belonged there. His lips pressed together briefly. Something was happening that he hadn't expected. He didn't know yet how much he hadn't expected. The demonstration round was the moment everyone had come for. The 5 finalists were brought to the front of the room, where a long whiteboard stretched across the full front wall. The judges, 6 of them, seated at a table facing the board, included 3 university mathematics professors, a representative from the National Competition Organization, a former International Mathematical Olympiad medalist who now worked in research at Georgia Tech, and Dr. Yvonne Chambers. When Amara walked to the front of the room and saw Dr. Chambers at the judges' table, she stopped for one step. Dr. Chambers caught her eye and gave the smallest possible nod. Amara straightened her spine and kept walking. The other 4 finalists were 13 and 14 years old, all from advanced academic tracks, all from programs with substantially more resources than Riverside Elementary. They were, by any reasonable assessment, impressive young mathematicians. They also stood at least a foot taller than Amara and glanced at her with the particular combination of curiosity and subtle condescension that 13-year-olds occasionally deploy toward 8-year-olds without fully meaning to. The format for the demonstration round was as follows. A single problem would be displayed on screen. Each finalist would be given chalk and access to the whiteboard. They would attempt to solve the problem, showing full working. No time limit. The judges wanted to observe method and reasoning, not just speed. The room filled with parents, observers, teachers, and program directors. Harwell was near the back. Ms. Cole, who had arranged to attend, was near the front, along with Abina and Kofi. Nearly 90 people were present. The lead judge, Professor William Adami of Georgia State's Mathematics Department, stood and addressed the room. He was a tall man with reading glasses and the measured cadence of someone accustomed to lecture halls. This year's demonstration problem, he announced, was selected from the problem set of the 2019 International Mathematical Olympiad. We have chosen it not because we expect our finalists to solve it, but because we believe that the quality of approach, the mathematical thinking, the structure of the attempt reveals more about a young mathematician's potential than any timed worksheet can. A murmur moved through the room. Parents exchanged glances. One of the 13-year-old finalists visibly exhaled. The problem appeared on screen. It was a number theory problem, a problem about integer sequences, divisibility conditions, and the existence of specific mathematical relationships. It was, by any measure, a profoundly difficult problem, the kind of problem that university students encounter, the kind that competition mathematicians train for years to approach. The room looked at it. Several parents in the audience, peering at the screen, furrowed their brows or whispered quietly to the person beside them. Then something happened. Amara looked at the screen. She looked at it for 10 seconds, and then she picked up the chalk and began to write, not slowly as if feeling her way, not tentatively as if guessing. She wrote the way you write when you have been here before, when you know the terrain. The chalk moved across the whiteboard in clear, deliberate strokes. The setup, the logical structure, the first key observation that unlocked the problem's architecture. Her handwriting was small and neat, and completely legible from the back of the room. After 40 seconds, she stepped back, turned to face the judges, and said in her quiet, steady voice, "The answer is yes, such a sequence exists. And here is the proof." She had not simply produced an answer. She had produced a proof, a complete, structured, methodologically sound mathematical proof, at the whiteboard in under a minute. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Professor Adami stood from his chair. He walked to the whiteboard, not quickly, but with the slow, deliberate step of someone checking and double-checking. He read each line from top to bottom. He turned to Dr. Chambers beside him. Dr. Chambers was already nodding, her arms folded, her eyes bright. The former Olympiad medalist, A man in his 40s who had seen every variety of mathematical talent across 2 continents, was leaning forward with both forearms on the table, staring at the whiteboard with an expression that had crossed out of professional assessment and into something that looked very much like awe. Ademi turned to face the room. "I'd like to take a moment," he said, and his voice was different now, still measured, but carrying a weight it hadn't had before. "To make an introduction." He gestured toward the small girl standing at the whiteboard with chalk still in her hand, who was looking at the judges with those calm, patient eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, Amara Osei is 8 years old. She is currently enrolled in the introductory track of a regional enrichment program. She has just solved an International Mathematical Olympiad problem, correctly, completely, and with a proof structure that I would be proud to see from a third-year university student." The room erupted. Not polite applause, not restrained, composed congratulations. The kind of eruption that happens when 90 people release something they've been holding without knowing they were holding it. Shock and joy, and that particular emotion that arrives when the world briefly makes the kind of sense it rarely does. Parents stood, judges stood. Keisha, the young proctor, had her hands over her mouth. Ms. Cole in the third row was crying. She was not a woman who cried easily, and she made no effort to hide it. Kofi Osei was standing very straight with his arms at his sides, his jaw working, his eyes full. Abina had both hands pressed to her chest, just over her heart, and she was looking at her daughter with an expression that contained the entirety of every single hard day, every night shift, every kitchen table session under a clip-on lamp, every hope carried quietly across an ocean. Amara looked out at the room. She didn't leap, she didn't cry. She looked at her parents, and she smiled, the specific, private, unhurried smile of someone who has been waiting quietly for a long time, and has not the slightest doubt that the wait was worth it. In the back of the room, Richard Harwell stood completely still. The color had drained from his face. He was looking at the whiteboard, at the proof written in small, neat handwriting, by the hand of the child he had placed in the introductory track. The child he had described as not ready, as potentially overwhelmed, as coming from a background that did not suggest preparation. He understood in the way that a person understands when something lands all at once what he had done. And he understood that everyone else in the room was going to understand it too. The aftermath of that morning unfolded with a particular kind of justice that is not loud, but is thorough. Professor Ademi, after conferring quietly with Dr. Chambers during the break, approached Abina and Kofi directly. He introduced himself. He told them in specific, carefully chosen terms what he had witnessed. He asked if he could share Amara's work with his department. He asked also whether they had considered the Summer Institute for Gifted Young Mathematicians at Georgia Tech, a fully funded residential program for exceptional students, and whether Amara might be interested. Abina listened to all of this with the careful stillness of someone who had learned, through long practice, to receive good news as thoughtfully as she received hard news. When Ademi finished, she said, "Yes, we would be very interested." The former Olympiad medalist, whose name was Dr. James Nkosi, asked if he could speak with Amara directly. He crouched down to her level in the way that adults who respect children do, and told her that he had competed in the International Mathematical Olympiad twice, and that she had just done. On a whiteboard, in under a minute, something that took him 3 hours to solve the first time he encountered that problem. Amara thought about this for a moment. Then she said, "How long did it take the second time?" Nkosi blinked. Then he laughed a full, genuine laugh. "About 40 minutes, he said. "I think with more practice," Amara said thoughtfully, "you could probably get it to 10. Nkosi laughed again, harder this time, and looked at Abina with an expression of pure delight. "She's extraordinary," he said. "I know," said Abina. Later that same afternoon, after the families had dispersed and the conference room was being cleared, Richard Harwell found Abina near the entrance as she was gathering their coats. He approached with the specific discomfort of a man who knows he owes something and is trying to decide how to pay it. "Mrs. Osei," he said, "I owe you and Amara an apology." Abina turned and looked at him. She did not make it easy, but she did not make it harder than it needed to be. "I made assumptions," he continued, "that I shouldn't have made. I used things that are irrelevant to mathematical ability as a basis for my judgment. I was wrong." I want you to know that. Abina was quiet for one measured moment. Mr. Harwell, she said, I accept your apology. And I'll tell you what I told my daughter a very long time ago. Other people's limits are not your limits. She knew that. She kept going anyway. I hope you'll carry that forward when you evaluate the next child who comes from a school like Riverside. Harwell nodded. He didn't speak again. What was there to say? In the weeks that followed, the Georgia Invitational Young Mathematicians Showcase circulated its results to affiliated programs and universities. Amara's proof was included, with her parents' permission, in the competition's formal documentation. 3 universities contacted the Osei family. A mathematics education researcher asked if she could write about Amara's case, anonymized, for an academic paper on the failures of conventional gifted identification methods in underserved communities. And Marcus, the graduate student who had asked 3 times over 3 months to have Amara moved to the advanced track, submitted a formal complaint to the program's oversight board, documenting the timeline of his requests and Harwell's responses. The board opened a review. The program's intake process was subsequently revised. A blind review component was added, meaning the first evaluation of any child's work was conducted without knowledge of their school, address, or parental occupation. It was a small change. It was not nothing. Harwell remained in his position. The world is imperfect, and one honest apology doesn't undo a pattern. But he knew, and the people around him knew. And sometimes knowing changes what comes next, even when it doesn't change what already happened. Amara Osei went on to attend the Summer Institute at Georgia Tech that July. She was the youngest participant by 3 years. She was the only child from a school like Riverside. She thrived. On the first day of the institute, the lead instructor, a brilliant, no-nonsense professor named Dr. Sarah Park, placed a problem on the board and invited the group to approach it. 14 teenagers and 1 8-year-old stood in front of that board. Amara didn't raise her hand first. She let the older students go. She watched how they thought. She asked careful questions. And when it was her turn, she walked to the board and completed the problem with the same quiet, unhurried certainty that had been her signature from the beginning. Dr. Park said afterward that in 30 years of teaching, she had met perhaps 4 students with Amara's quality of mathematical mind. That the number was not a judgment about the others. It was a statement about rarity, about how occasionally the universe produces something that doesn't fit the standard scale. There is something this story asks us to sit with if we're willing. It is not simply a story about one remarkable child. It is a story about what we decide to see, about the assumptions we build without realizing we're building them, about what talent looks like, where it comes from, what family background and zip code do and do not predict, about the children who are sitting, right now, in introductory tracks they don't belong in, not because anyone looked at them and decided they weren't smart, but because no one looked at them carefully enough to see how smart they were. Amara did not become extraordinary because she was placed in the right program, or given the right resources, or recognized by the right people. She was already extraordinary. The kitchen table was always there. The clip-on lamp was always there. The marble notebook was always full. What changed was not Amara. What changed was the moment the room could no longer look away. And Abina Osei, who had written on that whiteboard refrigerator every morning for years, "Your mind is a gift. Use it boldly," had understood something all along that the enrichment programs and their intake processes had not. That dignity does not require validation to be real. That potential does not require permission to grow. That a child doing mathematics by a clip-on lamp in Atlanta, Georgia, at midnight is not waiting to be discovered. She is already there. If this story moved you, if Amara's quiet persistence and her family's unwavering belief reminded you that dignity is not given, it is carried, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. These are the stories that don't always make headlines, the ones that happen in kitchens and classrooms and hallways where no camera is running. They deserve to be told. But Amara's story is only the beginning. Because what happened when a young man walked into a law firm's boardroom, was handed a junior associate coffee and told to wait outside, and then opened his briefcase and introduced himself as the opposing counsel, well, That story is going to make today look like an introduction. Until next time.